The air inside the conference hall in Dori wasn't just hot, it was heavy. It pressed down like a silent force, thick with sweat, suspicion, and something more dangerous, anticipation. Ceiling fans spun uselessly overhead, moving heat instead of air. The kind of heat that made even the most decorated officers feel exposed, like the walls themselves were watching. Soldiers lined the room's edges, fingers resting on rifle triggers. Foreign journalists scribbled notes, lenses ready to capture history. Regional governors exchanged nervous glances. Something bigger than a meeting was about to unfold, and everyone in that room could feel it in their bones. At the head of the table sat a man who, by all appearances, didn't belong there. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Young. Calm. Dressed not in a politician's suit, but in worn military fatigues. No gold epaulets. No sunglasses. Just steel in his gaze and conviction in his silence. He wasn't performing for the cameras. He was simply present, grounded, immovable, like an oak tree in a storm. The chair across from him remained empty. But everyone knew who it was reserved for. General Coup DOP. A towering figure of the old military elite. A man with decades of battlefield scars, and the scent of foreign intelligence on his coat. DOP wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to dominate. His plan was simple. Humiliate the young captain on live television, destroy his credibility, and reclaim power for the old guard. This summit wasn't about unity, it was a stage set for a political execution. But what DOP didn't know was that the trap he'd set was already closing around him. In the next few minutes, the world would witness something rare. Not a shootout. Not a military coup. But a masterclass in leadership, integrity, and courage under fire. The kind of moment that doesn't just go viral. It rewrites the future. And this is how it all began. The summit was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. At 9:55, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was already there. Not pacing. Not rehearsing a speech. But sitting casually beside the junior soldiers stationed at the door, asking them about their families, checking if they had enough water, smiling softly when one of them said his son had just learned to read. It wasn't a show. That was who he was. The mediators and governors kept checking their watches. 10 o'clock came and went. 10:15, still no sign of General DOP. By 10:30, tension was starting to coil in the air. A classic power play, make the leader wait. Make him look weak. Remind everyone who still holds the real authority. Then, at exactly 10:45, the doors burst open. He didn't walk in. He arrived. General Coup DOP entered like a man stepping onto a red carpet. 12 bodyguards flanked him, overbuilt, stone-faced, their movements robotic. DOP wore a pristine uniform that looked like it had been ironed by fear itself. Gold trim, custom medals, sunglasses that gleamed under the harsh lights. He didn't glance at Traore. Didn't acknowledge the mediators. He laughed loudly at a joke no one heard, tossed his sunglasses onto the table with a theatrical clack, and pulled out his chair with all the elegance of a man hosting a party, rather than attending a crisis summit. No salute. No apology. Just a smirk. So, DOP began, voice booming, perfectly pitched for the cameras, "We're all gathered here, waiting for a captain." The jab landed with a sickening thud. Gasps rippled through the room. Journalists leaned forward. Lenses zoomed in. "I thought this was a serious meeting," he added, voice oozing with mockery. "Not a rehearsal for children playing politics in the sand." The silence was immediate. Dense. You could hear pens freeze mid-note. And still, Traore didn't flinch. He simply looked at Dop. Calm. Still. Focused. Not offended. Not rattled. Just watching. Because while everyone else saw a performance, Traore saw something else. A man desperately trying to prove he still mattered. The crowd was tense, unsure. Some wondered, would the captain fire back? Would he shout? Slam the table? But Traore didn't move. He knew this wasn't a shouting match. It was a game of chess. And the opening move had just been made. Dop didn't sit. He hovered. Standing at the edge of the table, he leaned forward, knuckles pressing into the wood as if he could physically dominate the room by sheer presence. His voice turned sharp, almost theatrical. "Look at you," he sneered, shaking his head with performative disappointment. A captain in combat boots sitting in a president's chair. He chuckled darkly. "You think holding a gun makes you a leader? The economy is collapsing. Borders are leaking. Terrorists roam freely. And you?" He paused, letting his smirk stretch into a sneer. "You're just a boy who got lucky." The insult wasn't subtle. It was a direct hit. Aimed not just at Traore, but at every soldier, every citizen who believed in him. "I commanded armies before you were even born," Dop continued. "I negotiated deals with real power players while you were still learning to march. You're not ready. You're reckless. And worst of all, you're alone." Another pause. A calculated silence. Dop leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a hiss only just loud enough for the microphones. "Go back to the barracks, little captain. Before your foolishness gets more of our men killed." The room was silent. Even the clicking of journalists' keyboards had stopped. The insult hung in the air like poison gas, everyone waiting for the young leader to lash out, to crack under pressure. But Captain Traore didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't even shift in his seat. He simply stared at Dop with eyes like steel forged in fire. And then, with a calm so unsettling it cut through the room like a razor, he leaned forward. "Is the performance over, General?" he asked. The question wasn't sarcastic. It was soft. Almost fatherly. "I see you've come dressed for the cameras," Traore continued, adjusting a few papers in front of him with deliberate slowness. "And I see you've practiced your lines well." Dop narrowed his eyes, thrown off by the tone. This wasn't the reaction he expected. "You talk about rank. You talk about years of service." "And yes, you're right," Traore said, nodding slightly. "You've been a general for 20 years. I've been a captain for only a few." He paused. "But tell me, General." His eyes locked on Dop's. "In those 20 years, while you were collecting medals and flying to Europe, why did our borders collapse? Why did our soldiers fight with empty guns? Why did our children run from terrorists while you were running up tabs at five-star hotels?" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was no longer defense. It was prosecution. Dop's smirk faltered. "You call me a boy?" Traore continued, his voice gaining quiet force. "This boy eats in the mess hall with his troops. This boy sleeps in the barracks, not in a marble palace. You want to talk about experience? Fine. You have experience in selling out your own people. In turning a blind eye while villages burned. In shaking hands with the men who profit from our pain." Traore leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I may be young. But I'd rather be a young man fighting for his country's soul than an old man who sold it for a paycheck." For a moment, everything stood still. And then, the room shifted. Soldiers who had stood stiff began to nod. Their eyes no longer on Dop, but on Traore. With something deeper than agreement. Respect. Even the journalists had stopped typing, caught off guard by the rawness, the precision, the moral power of the captain's reply. Dop opened his mouth, about to speak. But Traore raised a single finger. Just one. And the general fell silent. It wasn't anger. It wasn't showmanship. It was authority. The kind no uniform or title can fake. The kind that's earned. And in that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't a boy pretending to lead. This was a leader reminding a traitor why he had lost the right to speak. Dop was rattled. His insults had failed. His performance had cracked. The room was no longer with him. He needed to strike back. Fast. So he went for the nuclear option. With a sudden motion that made the security team tense, Dop reached down beside his chair and pulled out a thick, black leather briefcase. It hit the table with a heavy, deliberate thud. A weapon, not of steel, but of secrets. You want to talk about truth? Dop said, voice low and threatening. Fine. Let's talk about the truth. His smirk returned, twisted now, more desperate than confident. I have documents in here that will end your little revolution in 5 minutes. The room froze. Journalists held their breath. Mediators exchanged looks of panic. Was this it? The moment where Traore's image would be shattered by some carefully planted scandal? Would he call for the cameras to stop? Would he lunge for the briefcase in panic? No. Traore didn't even blink. Instead, a quiet smile formed on his face. Not amused. Not mocking. Just, calm. Like a teacher watching a child lie about homework. Go ahead, Traore said, gesturing toward the briefcase with an open palm. If you have something to show, don't keep us waiting. Read it. Out loud. Right now. Dop blinked. He hadn't expected that. What did you say? He asked, trying to recover his balance. Open it, Traore repeated, voice as steady as ever. Let the people hear it. You said you have the truth, show it. Dop's hand hovered over the latches. His eyes darted around the room. Cameras zoomed in. Soldiers stood taller. Even his own bodyguards weren't sure what to do. He wasn't supposed to be challenged. Not like this. Not so publicly. I will release these when the time is right, Dop stammered. Through the courts. That's when Traore laughed. Not with scorn. But with something deeper, pity. The proper time is now, General, he said. But you won't open it. Because you can't. He stood slowly, the sound of his boots scraping the floor echoing through the silent room. I have nothing to hide, he said, voice gaining strength. My bank account is empty because my salary feeds the widows of fallen soldiers. My secret deals are made with farmers in the fields, not foreign agents in backrooms. You cannot blackmail a man who wants nothing for himself. The murmurs returned, louder this time. Heads nodded. Hearts shifted. The briefcase, once a looming threat, now looked ridiculous. A cheap prop in a failed performance. Dop tried to recover. You think speeches will protect you? He hissed. You think you're untouchable? No, Traore said simply. I just know what I stand for. And that is more dangerous than any file in that case. At that moment, the balance of power flipped. Not because Traore had shouted. Not because he had exposed secrets, but because he had none to expose. That's what terrified Dop. That's what silenced the room. Traore had just demonstrated something rare in politics. Immunity not from force, but from fear. And that, more than anything, made him unstoppable. Dop was losing control. The room had shifted. The silence that once worked in his favor now turned against him. His bluff had failed. His insults had failed. And worst of all, Traore hadn't raised his voice once. Dop knew he had to do something drastic. So he gambled everything on one final, dangerous move. He stood up suddenly, knocking his chair back with a loud screech. His voice turned cold, cruel. "You talk about soldiers," he snapped, pointing a shaking finger at Traore. "You talk about widows? You are the reason they are widows. It was you who sent those men north last week. It was you who led them into that ambush." Gasps echoed across the hall. He was referring to a recent tragedy, an ambush that had killed several brave young soldiers. A national wound. A moment of mourning still fresh in everyone's mind. Using their deaths for political gain wasn't just tasteless. It was unforgivable. "You call yourself a leader?" Dop shouted, now pacing like a man possessed. "You're just a butcher leading sheep to slaughter." He leaned forward again, eyes blazing. "And do you know what your own men say about you? Behind your back? They say you're weak. That you cry in your office while they bleed in the dirt. And today I'm giving them the signal." Then, he did something terrifying. He looked over Traore's shoulder, directly at the captain's personal security team. At a young man with sharp eyes and a steady hand resting on his holster. "Lieutenant Hassan." Dop gave a subtle nod. A silent signal. For a moment, time froze. Was this it? Was this the coup? Had Dop managed to turn Traore's own men against him? Traore turned toward Hassan. Slowly. No fear in his eyes. It was a fatal move, or so it seemed. Hassan stood still. One hand on his weapon. His expression unreadable. The foreign journalists were holding their breath. Soldiers shifted nervously. This was how so many stories in Africa ended. A single nod. A sudden betrayal. A leader dragged away in handcuffs. Dop's smile widened. He could almost taste victory. But then, something happened. Lieutenant Hassan stepped forward. Not toward Traore, but toward Dop. He walked past his own commander, boots echoing with intent. His face was calm, firm. He stopped just inches from the general. Dop extended his hand, expecting allegiance. Instead, Hassan stared at it in silence. Then looked Dop in the eye and spoke, voice loud enough for the microphone to catch every word. "General," he said, steady and sharp, "you offered us 3 times our salary to betray our country." The room erupted in shocked gasps. "The money is in my truck outside." Now even the bodyguards were looking at Dop in disbelief. "You can have your money back," Hassan added. "We don't eat money, sir. We eat dignity. And we only take orders from Captain Ibrahim Traoré." Then, with no theatrics, no fanfare, Hassan turned around and returned to his post. Standing taller than before. One by one, the other guards nodded silently. Some even placed their hands over their hearts. It wasn't just loyalty. It was belief. It was conviction. It was a rejection of everything Dop represented. Dop stood frozen, arms still outstretched, grasping at nothing. He had been counting on fear, on greed, on the old rules of power. But the game had changed. Traore didn't buy loyalty. He earned it. And now, even the soldiers in the room could see the difference. Diop, once towering, now looked small. Isolated. Obsolete. His power, the kind built on manipulation and bribes, was useless here. He had been exposed. Not by a scandal. Not by force. But by something far more dangerous. Integrity. Dop was unraveling. The room had turned against him. His money had failed. His threats had failed. Even the loyalty he thought he could buy had slipped through his fingers. And now, he stood alone, exposed, irrelevant. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. His eyes darted, no longer scanning the guards. He wasn't looking for support. He was looking for a way out. Then he found it, hidden inside his jacket. "You think you've won?" Dop whispered, almost to himself, a wild look flashing in his eyes. "You think this is over?" And before anyone could react, he moved. Too fast. Security shouted. Journalists ducked under tables. Chairs clattered. The room dissolved into chaos. "Gun!" someone screamed. Dozens of rifles were raised, all pointed in one direction. At the center of the room, trembling, stood General Dop. And in his hand, a silver-plated pistol. Not aimed at the ceiling. Not aimed at the guards. Aimed directly at the chest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. "Back off!" Dop shouted, his voice cracking under pressure. "I'll do it. Don't think I won't." Hassan's hand was already on his trigger. "Drop it, General, or we fire." But Traoré didn't move. He didn't hide. Didn't flinch. Instead, he raised one hand, a clear command. "Hold your fire," he said. "Captain, he has a weapon." Hassan yelled, panic rising in his voice. "I know," Traoré replied. "Calm. Focused. Stand down." Then, in front of every camera, every gun, every beating heart in that room, he stepped forward. Toward the pistol. Toward death. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. No armor. No weapon. No shield. Just a man in uniform, walking toward the barrel of a gun like it was nothing more than a flashlight. The pistol shook in Dop's hand. "Stay back," he warned, sweat rolling down his face. "I'll shoot, Traoré. Don't test me." But Traoré didn't stop. He came within 2 feet, close enough to see the fear in Dop's eyes. Close enough to smell the sweat. Then he said it. Not a threat. Not a plea. Just a truth. "You're shaking, Siku." He used the general's first name. Not to insult him, but to strip away the mask. The medals. The illusion. "You're shaking because you know pulling that trigger won't save you," he said softly. "You can kill me. I'm just a man. Flesh and bone. But if you kill me today, you make me a martyr." His voice dropped even lower. "And tomorrow, 10 million Ibrahims will rise." The words hit like a thunderclap. "You're not fighting a man anymore," he said. "You're fighting an awakening." Dop's hand trembled harder. His eyes were wide. His breathing ragged. Then he choked out a question, barely more than a whisper. "Why, aren't you afraid?" Traoré didn't hesitate. "Because I died a long time ago," he said. "The day I put on this uniform, I gave my life to the people. I have nothing to lose, because I own nothing. He stepped even closer. But you are a prisoner of your fear. Look at you. You're holding a gun, but you're the one who's trapped. The silence that followed was deafening. DOP looked around the room. He saw faces filled not with fear, but with disgust. He saw eyes that no longer respected him, no longer even feared him. He had become what he once despised. A coward. Then, Traore slowly extended his hand. Not to take the gun, but simply to offer it. Give it to me, he said. It's over. Come home. DOP looked at the open palm. 1,000 thoughts flashed through his mind. He could pull the trigger. Or surrender everything. He hesitated. And then, his fingers failed him. The pistol slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud clank. The moment the sound echoed through the hall, it was done. Not with blood. But with mercy. Not with force. But with faith. General DOP collapsed into his chair, sobbing, shattered, not by bullets, but by the unbearable weight of grace. Traore turned, picked up the gun, and handed it silently to Hassan. Then he looked back at the weeping man. And the world waited to see. What would justice look like? The gun was now in Hassan's hands. The general was broken, slumped in his chair, face buried in trembling hands. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Not a trace of the arrogance that had once filled the room remained. Journalists scrambled to document what had just happened. The story was already writing itself, coup attempt foiled. General arrested. Young leader prevails. Security moved in. Zip ties in hand. Ready to drag the traitor to a dark cell. But once again, Traore raised his hand. Stop. The guards froze. Hassan hesitated. Captain, he tried to kill you, he said, still stunned. He's a traitor. I know, Traore replied. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look victorious. He just looked tired. Then he turned back to DOP. Still sobbing. Still shattered. Traore took a breath, and spoke, not like a soldier, not like a politician, but like a father addressing a wounded child. If we lock him up, he said, turning to the room, he becomes a victim. If we kill him, he becomes a symbol, for